Gentlemen, as mentioned, my name is retired Major Mark Campbell. I'm one of the 6 plaintiffs in the representative class action. Can everybody hear me at the back? Okay, so it's become known as the Equitas class action lawsuit. Equitas is a society that's raising the funds, so Equitas is really the enabling arm, I guess, of a class action lawsuit. The lawsuit isn't the Equitas Society's lawsuit. The lawsuit is my lawsuit and the lawsuit of the 5 other plaintiffs. I want to tell you a little bit of my story and what happened to me and how I perceive things as I move through it, just so you have an understanding of how your relatives, perhaps, some of your friends or your neighbors, some of the things that they have gone through as disabled veterans within your communities. Because believe it or not, there are over, apparently, 500,000 active veterans in this country, many of whom have disabilities that forced them out of the service before they were ready to leave. So, chances are you know somebody, or you know somebody who knows somebody who served in the forces and likely has a disability. For myself, I was wounded 6 years ago. As mentioned, I was on a village sweep operation. I was a mentor to the Afghan National Army, providing them on-the-job training in combat operations. What happened was they saw me as leadership. They waited until I walked over a particular piece of ground. They detonated an improvised explosive device underneath me, launched me. That creates dust, confusion, screams for help, and then they hit us simultaneously from 3 sides with rocket-propelled grenades and machine gun fire. It's called a complex ambush. Nobody's supposed to get out of it. If they do it right, it's murder. Unfortunately, they did it wrong. We were in a position to give it back to them, gave them the good news right back. As soon as they opened fire on us, we gave it back to them, overpowered them, won the initiative, won the firefight. But it took a while. When I was blowing up, I remained conscious and lucid throughout the entire ordeal. I flew through the air. I remember landing on my back. I remember heat on my backside. I remember the orange flash all around me. And the next thing I knew, I'd landed on my back, had the wind knocked out of me because of my armor plate landing on my chest. I tried to sit up. Of course, my legs came up instead. My left leg was gone, just above the knee. My right leg was hanging on by a few tendrils below the right knee, and both femoral arteries were going like this, 2 to 3 feet out in front of me. Had I been knocked unconscious, I wouldn't be here talking to you. I'd have bled out and died within minutes. As it was, I was able to yell for help, and to their credit, Canadian soldiers who were around me, under fire, under intense enemy fire, jumped onto my position, ended up having to put 2 tourniquets on each leg, clamp down in order to turn off the blood flow, and that prevented me from bleeding out. They dragged me undercover in the middle of the firefight to get me out of the line of fire along with 4 other casualties. It took 90 minutes in a running gun battle over hill and dale to evacuate us to a point where we could get in a helicopter safely to do a casualty evacuation. Once the helicopter landed, I knew I only had to wait another half an hour in order to fly to the surgical hospital in Kandahar. So at the end of that flight, they whisked me into the surgical operating room in Kandahar Airfield at the Field Surgical Hospital. And as soon as they put the mask on me to knock me out, that was it. My body shut down and I died in the operating table. They used the paddles and brought me back. I spent 5 days in an induced coma because they had to intubate me due to blast damage to my lungs. I next ended up I spent a week in Kandahar until I was ready to fly. They shipped me off to the Regional Medical Center in Landstuhl, Germany, which is an amazing American medical facility. I spent a week there in the ICU where I almost died again from a cardiopulmonary embolism when a blood clot broke free in my leg and headed for my heart. Fortunately, I happened to be in the best ICU in the world at that particular moment in time, and they managed to save my life yet again. After that, back in Canada, I spent 2 months undergoing well over a dozen surgeries to my legs in the University of Alberta Hospital. And then I spent a further 2 months in the Glen Rose Rehabilitation Hospital in Edmonton, Alberta, trying to learn how to walk again with prosthetic legs, which didn't work out in my particular case, and learning wheelchair skills as well after the fact. After that, that was it. Out I go onto the street in September of 2008. My family, as I mentioned, once the shock wore off, they were psychologically devastated. My son was 11 years old at the time, knocked the wind right out of his sails. He saw his superhero lying there, missing his legs. You can imagine what that does to a young boy's self-confidence and self-esteem. My daughter, she was younger. She was only 8 years old at the time. So all she knew that was that Daddy was hurt real bad. And of course my wife was just beside herself. And it didn't get any better when we got home and we started to realize, as I came out of the drug-induced haze, that wait a minute, the government told me they'd have my back if I was injured or killed. And here I am, and I'm in my hospital bed, reading the regulations, signing forms with Veterans Affairs, and like a slow motion car crash, the dawning horror of realizing that not only is my left leg getting shorter by an inch every day as they cut the bone back, but I've been financially screwed by the Canadian government in the meantime. If I'd been hurt my first tour, I'd be under the former Pension Act. $30,000 a year more for my family. A year. That's a post-secondary education for my children. But because I was hurt after the new Veterans Charter came into effect in 2007, I was injured in 08, I fall under the new Veterans Charter. The government changed the rules, called it a good deal in 2007 with the new Veterans Charter, said we're doing a great thing. If all the political parties don't vote for this, then you don't support the soldier. This is Veterans Affairs bureaucrats talking, of course. Meanwhile, what they're doing is sliding through a $42 million a year savings program, gussied up to look like a good deal for Canada's troops. So you have the government of Canada change the rules, reduce disability compensation by between 30 and 90% in the middle of the war, and didn't bother to tell those of us busy fighting the war and training to fight the war. A bit disgusting and a bit duplicitous, to say the least. Difficulties in dealing with the Canadian Forces and Veterans Affairs bureaucracies at that point, which were still in their infancy, particularly on the Canadian Forces side. The stress of trying to deal with those agencies while I was in the hospital in order to prepare our home for my discharge from the hospital drove my wife to a nervous breakdown. The system was that dysfunctional. My wife was a serving warrant officer clerk in the Canadian Armed Forces. She was a pretty capable lady. She was rendered basically a psychological casualty of my injury. As a result of that, she was medically released from the Canadian Armed Forces as medically unfit for service. And in doing so, they denied her all disability credit or disability compensation because they said her injury was not attributable to her military service. It was attributable to her being spouse of an injured military member. So she gets nothing. My family lost 1/3 of our income right then and there. You want to talk about trauma? You'd be surprised. My trauma, what keeps me punching and kicking and doing things in the night, is not my legs. I don't relive the incident where I lost my legs. I was trained to deal with adversity throughout my entire career as a professional infantry officer. Losing my legs was just the ultimate challenge. Here I am 5 years later, I'm getting used to the chair. These won't be a big deal until I become too frail to move myself around or I blow a shoulder and then I'm helpless. My trauma comes from the constant, ongoing, continuing betrayal by the Government of Canada as regards appropriate compensation for Canada's disabled veterans who fall under the new Veterans Charter since 2007. That is my trauma, and it's unending, it's ceaseless until we get this problem sorted out. It's a betrayal by a government that reduced disability compensation by between 30 and 90% in the middle of the war and didn't bother to tell anybody. It's a betrayal by a government that has failed to act on recommendations that Veterans Affairs Canada has been sitting on over 230 recommendations since 2010 and have done nothing. They've enacted five of those recommendations and not even the primary ones. Thus far, my family has received exactly $250,000, which was tax-free. That was the so-called infamous lump sum from the Canadian government. That was the maximum settlement. It was based on $125,000 left leg, $125,000 right leg. Sorry, Mr. Campbell, you've reached the maximum compensation level. There will be no financial compensation for the pain and suffering associated with the damage to your groin area, your abdomen, your ruptured right eardrum, your hearing loss, your traumatic brain injury, your post-traumatic stress disorder, your major depressive disorder, and there's probably several more injuries that I've forgotten about in the meantime, to include sexual dysfunction in a marriage of 24 years. Not a dime of compensation for pain and suffering. It is important to note, most disabled veterans do not receive that maximum settlement, which is now $300 and change. Okay, the average settlement is about between $43,000 and $47,000. That's it. And the people that get $43,000 to $47,000 as an average settlement, they're not the ones that get taken care of for the rest of their lives with what they call the earnings loss benefit, or what used to be called the Service Income Security Insurance Program's long-term disability program, because that's all it is. No, the guys that get $43,000, $47,000 in a lump sum, they get a handshake and a boot in the ass out the door with up to 2 years of voc rehab, and that's it. They're done. They're expected to carry on with life as a civilian, having transitioned with 2 years of assistance. People like me, who are so damaged that they're not expected to make a successful transition to a new civilian career for reasons that include age, education, and degree of injury, and what we're capable of doing after the fact. So people like me who are so disabled that they're not expected to have a successful transition to a second career will receive what's called an earnings loss benefit. The problem with the earnings loss benefit is it's currently 75% of your pre-release salary taxed. Okay? Under any civilian workers' compensation program in Canada, be it municipal, provincial, or federal, you're either 75%, which is your after-tax earnings, or you're 100% taxed. What you aren't is 75% earnings taxed. That leaves you with a little more than 50% of your former take-home. The failures of the new Veterans Charter are manifest. Sadly, the parliamentary review we just saw was a whitewash. That's all it was. It was a whitewash. It was a rehash of all the existing 230-odd recommendations. All they did was take multiple recommendations, group them together under 14 new headings, and call them 14 new recommendations. Well, these are the exact same recommendations Veterans Affairs has had for the past 6 years. The time for recommendations is over. We have the recommendations. It's time for legislative action to fix the problems with the new Veterans Charter. I just want to mention or outline for you what I see as the 5 requirements to satisfy the difficulties with the new Veterans Charter. The first is we need a social covenant. We need a social contract a renewed social contract between the Government of Canada and Her Majesty's Armed Forces. And the reason we need that is because the Government of Canada has clearly lost sight of the promises that were made to Canada's soldiers in the First World War on the eve of the attack on Vimy Ridge. And Sir Robert Borden told the troops the country had their backs. Second, we need the lump sum replaced. We need to revert back to the monthly pension plan. That is the only means by which injured, disabled soldiers will wake up every morning and know every month when the check arrives that the country has their backs and that they have long-term financial security necessary for themselves and their families to have as rewarding a life as they can have. The third thing we need is the reserve force entitled to the same benefits as the regular force, because right now they're treated like awkward stepchildren, and it's just not right. It's not fair. It's not just. The fourth thing we need is to ensure that our personnel do not lose income under the earnings loss benefit. Anyone who has to undergo or receive the earnings loss benefit is by definition pretty vulnerable in terms of vulnerable people within our society. And right now, the earnings loss benefit guarantees that recipients will have a lower income and a lower family standard of living as a direct result of having been disabled in the service of Canada. That's one of the things that makes us a distinctive class within Canadian society. We're the only class of Canadian citizen, disabled veterans, guaranteed to have a lower income because of a workplace injury. That's what we're fighting to change. And lastly, I would say we need the reestablishment of a disability-based compensation system, because right now what's happened is we've gone from under the Pension Act, you got compensated based on your assessed degree of disability. So if the corporal was 75% disabled and the major was 75% disabled, they would get the same amount of money moving forward in life as brand new minted civilians. Makes sense. Same injuries, same challenges. Under the new Veterans Charter, because they've gone to an insurance model where your compensation is based on a percentage of your salary at the time you were injured, guess what? Now a corporal missing 2 legs gets $40,000 a year for the rest of his life, and the major missing 2 legs gets $85,000 a year for the rest of his life. They both have the same challenges moving forward in life as civilians. How is that fair? How is that right? The answer is, it isn't. And that's what we're here to fix.